Hello. So I have just finished reading Death in Kashmir by MMK. This is a fantastic little whodunit, as MMK herself used to call them. And I posted yesterday a bit of a biopic about the author herself, so I'll try not to rave about her too much. But we've got this Penguin modern classic. I think it's a modern classic. It's a Penguin, anyway, with a fantastic wraparound cover by George Sharp that I think really captures the scene for the ending of this novel. Can I do this? I probably shouldn't. I shouldn't do that, right? Yes, so Death in Kashmir was the first, I think it was the second adult novel that the author produced, and she started it when she was actually living in the place in which it starts. It starts in Kashmir, in a skiing vacation to Gulmarg. I can't pronounce any of this, and I will say that MMK has given you a pronunciation guide in the front, because when they made a televised version of her book, The Far Pavilions, it annoyed her that none of the words were being said correctly by the actors. So she's done her best to help me be able to pronounce Indian words in the way that they would have been pronounced when this came out, because she was very familiar with that Indian. Singajar, oh God. It sounds beautiful when I read it in my head. I just can't pronounce it. Singaraj? No. Anyway. So, she was actually living in, should I just, Srinajjar. It's in Kashmir, and we've got a little map there, so we've got an idea about where we are in the world. So she was there when she first started reading this book. Then she put it aside for a great deal of time. She got married, went back to England, and then finally produced it. It is, I think, the largest of all of her crime series, of which there's a few, and they're all very good. But I think that this one has a special magic. And if you're going to start reading her crime series, and you start with this one, you may be a little bit disappointed by how formulaic a couple of the last ones are. I've already read a few of them, and I was delighted by this one. So if you're only going to ever read one, maybe it should be Death in Kashmir, or maybe you're going to be like me and you just find something in MMK's writing that is so fantastic that it speaks to me no matter what. But in Death in Kashmir, we start in the skiing vacation to Gulmarg, and our main protagonist, Sarah Parish, is where our starting point for this, when she wakes up in her room in the skiing resort. She's left the window open because the room felt stuffy when she went to bed, but the moon has risen and it's flooding her room in white moonlight, and a strange stealthy sound has awakened her. It's icy cold outside the bed, but she gets up, and in her bathroom she realizes that further down the row of rooms, someone is trying to break in. They're filing through the window fittings. Now, her first thought is that it's a criminal element that's breaking to her room 2 doors down, where Mrs. Matthews lies dead. She'd been found dead due to accidental death on the slopes early in the day, and that she'd been brought back to her room. And so you've got this horror looming over everything right to start with. And then Sarah realised that the window that they're at isn't actually Mrs. Matthews. It's the one in between, which is inhabited by Julia? Is it Julia? How can I have already forgotten the second main character? Well, you don't hear her name very often. I guess I can be forgiven for that. So yes. She realises that it's the window in between a Miss Rushton. Julia Rushton? Janet Rushton. Yeah, Janet Rushton. And then she makes a sound, and the figure who's trying to break in turns and looks at her, and they're wearing a mask covering their face. She's certain that it's a man, but she isn't really certain who. And she ends up going out around the other side, tiptoeing down the balcony, to Miss Rushton's room, and she breaks in. She knocks on the door, but eventually when she isn't let in, she just pushes into the room, and has a gun pushed to her neck as a thank you. However, Janet recovers from that, and she goes through all sorts of excuses for why she had a gun and this, that, and the other, and Sarah's not having any of it. She says, look, you're a terrible liar, but I've got no reason to expect you to tell me the truth. Eventually Janet does, and that starts this huge spy novel, because Janet is one of a large company of people in the service of the intelligence, the British intelligence in India, many of whom do tiny things like passing on a rumour or passing on a note, but this huge web of what Kipling calls the great game in one of my favourite books, Kim. MMK also, like Kipling, she edited a few of his books and references Kim and the great game in this book a few times. Anyway, Janet tells Sarah this whole story while the radio's on so they can't be overheard, and eventually explains that Mrs. Matthew was the other spy in that group. She's been killed. It was an intentional death, and she explains how she knows that. They've found something that's so huge that they can't write it down. They don't know who to pass it to. They've been waiting for a contact that hasn't been arrived. Now Mrs. Matthew has been killed, and Janet feels that she may be next. So she takes Sarah Parrish's address and writes it on an envelope and says, if the worst comes to the worst, I have left a record somewhere and I'll post this to you. Anyway, the worst does come to the worst. This is a skiing trip, and the atmosphere of the mountains and the snow and the runs and the trees, it's all quite gorgeous, and Kaye does the best of it. And we slowly hear about the different people in the party. They're mainly people of the British Raj who are living in India, and it's the last gasp of the Raj. So when MMK originally started this book, it was meant to be set at the beginning of the Raj, earlier on, but she later revised it to the last days because as the British were about to hand back India to the control of India in 1947. So this is set in either in 47 or in 46, but anyway, there's this last gasp effect. All these people who've been living in India, it's been their home, but they haven't really considered themselves Indian. They're British living in India, and they have this world that cannot be replicated in England, and they've got this style of life that can't be replicated either. MMK does a great job of showing that in a very analytical, I think, light. So you've got people who make their life essentially from playing polo, but polo is part of the old British Army, when every officer who went out there had their own horses and played polo. Now it's a mechanized army, and polo is dying out. And one of the characters there used to be essentially a polo star, and that's how he married his wife and made his fortune. And the destruction of that way of life is very poignantly described. Also, you've got all these people who are a member of the Indian ski club who used to go up to Gulmarg every year. And there's this sense of this is the last time, because this time next year they won't be able to. Kashmir isn't really part of India. It's an independent principality which does take advice from its British advisor, but is actually separate. So come the handing back of India to India control, Kashmir is probably not going to be what it was ever again. Okay, so it's no spoiler really to say that Janet does actually meet a dire ending, and Sarah, who's been involved in this mystery spy situation, which she almost can't believe, because the implication is that one of these other British people who she knows well and is partying with and is skiing with is involved in this as well, and she can't quite metabolize that. But there's all these clues that the reader will take on board to an extent Sarah doesn't. Anyhow, the next part of the book, that it sets up the whole scene really beautifully, that part. But the next part of the book is Sarah has gone back down to the plains to Peshawar, where she is staying with her aunt. And we have the plains described with their heat, their dust, completely different atmosphere to Kashmir, where the ancient Rajas used to go in summer to enjoy the cool of the mountains, and where the British Raj have gone for all this time as well. Anyway, she's back in Peshawar, normal circle of engagements and parties and everything, and she's virtually put aside the memory of everything that happened up in Gulmarg. I'm almost certainly saying that wrong. Sorry, MMK, you did your best. But it comes back to her. The message, the letter with her address on it arrives from somewhere in India. She doesn't instantly read it. She's put all this stuff aside from her memory. She's forgotten Janet and Mrs. Matthews as much as she can, and this whole big spy construct that seems impossible. Both of them were ruled accidental death, and after Janet had been ruled accidental death, Sarah had gone on a mission to retrace her last steps and how it might have happened. And that's a really exciting, really fascinating, engaging part. So we go on to this next part, and once again, the setting is spectacular. Throughout this, it feels like MMK is describing a place of enchantment, a real enchantment that she lived through and knew. Small details like this was stood here, that stood there. It feels real throughout. It feels real, and it feels in the same way almost like a magical elfland kingdom. Because essentially it is. The world that MMK lived in doesn't exist anymore. The India that she writes this book set in doesn't exist anymore either. And she, in the postscript, she talks about the things that have changed and the things that have probably changed even more since that postscript was written. By the end of this book, you will want to ring your travel agent and go to Kashmir and see these beautiful snowfields and these pine forests. Stay in a houseboat on the lake in this Syringa place that I can't pronounce. And you can't, because travel advisories do not recommend traveling to Kashmir at the moment. And in the postscript, MMK actually adds a sad note about how humanity seems determined to destroy the beautiful. Anyhow, back in Peshawar, Sarah is fascinated by this young guy, Charles, and there's a mystery about him because his the unit he belongs to is about to move on to Palestine, but he isn't going with them for some reason. And that's enough to give a reader the hint that Charles is going to be involved in this whole spy game. So Sarah's received this letter, which actually came from Janet's solicitors. After they'd finished settling her affairs, they sent the letter on to its destination, which is her. And through a set of circumstances, she opens it while at a dance, an event, surrounded by other people who probably shouldn't know about it, including this young Charles. And there's just so much in this book that's hard to describe. Anyway, he becomes involved. She ends up, instead of moving on to Ceylon like she'd planned on, going up to stay in a houseboat in Syringa. She doesn't entirely want to begin with. But what Janet has done is sent her a very minimal note saying little except that a record is in Srinagar, in the houseboat, the Water Witch. So we go there, and apparently Kashmir in summer, this lake is a place where people used to stay, and even when this book was published, they still would. They'd hire a houseboat and they'd stay on it, and they sound beautiful. Janet's was called Water Witch, and Sarah ends up travelling up there with a couple called the Creeds, who she's travelled with before. She was travelling with them to go skiing as well. Hugo and Fudge, as she's called. And they end up mooring their houseboat next to hers. She's living in Janet's, and she's going through it, desperately trying to find what this record was, because Janet just said that it was there and included the docket that meant that she could stay on her houseboat. Incidentally, the houseboat that the Creeds are staying on is called the Sunflower, and the Sunflower was actually the houseboat that MMK's father used to hire for them to stay in when they went to Srinagar. Now on this houseboat, Sarah's trying to discover where this record is or how it might have been kept, and her thoughts turn towards the books. There's a lot of books and pamphlets, and she's going through them, and other people seem incredibly interested in this houseboat as well. Reggie Craddock is a young man who had organised the skiing trip. He tries to hire it for her. She's willing to hire any other one that she wants that will be cheaper than this one, because this one was hired before the end of the Raj came about. So she refuses, and then someone else tries to buy her out, and then someone else tries to buy her out, and she's starting to feel very encircled by all these people, and she doesn't know who to trust. She does, however, trust Charles, who also turns up on the shores of the Dal Lake, staying in one of the clubs, and she helps him in a couple of ways to try and determine spy stuff, and she's getting more and more involved into the spy stuff, until at the end her own life is in danger. And the last part is, don't plan on doing anything else. Once you start that end bit, it's going to completely and utterly absorbed me. I did nothing but read it. The end is vastly satisfying in every level, and the writing is beautiful. So the locales, it almost feels like you're engaged in armchair tourism. This is considered on the internet to be a number of genres: mystery, historical fiction, India fiction, romance, historical, suspense, and more. There is a romance. Most of MMK's adult books do have a romance, but again, the romance is something that you know is happening in the background, but it's not in any way intrusive, unlike many more modern books. What is interesting here is you've got these beautiful descriptions that completely draw you to the location, but in the meantime you've got something really exciting happening in the background. So you've got this fission between wanting to read through as fast as possible to find out what happens next, and wanting to revel in the beautiful writing. So as an example of that, early on, the sun was still hidden behind the rim of Ampha Wat, but its reflected glow made a glory of the snowfields. The sky was a pale wash of turquoise against which the mountain peaks cut violet patterns, and from somewhere among the pine woods below the Marg, a thin line of smoke from a woodcutter's fire rose unwavering into the still morning air. Stunning. And that's just one example. You've got a huge suite of characters that MMK manages here. You've got colonels and retirees and intelligence officers and women that stay with their aunts. You've got a whole suite of characters, and she manages to keep them very, very distinct, introduce them at just the right pace, keep them separate. And so you have an immense number of characters that waltz through the pages of this book. It's 332 pages, which is perhaps a little bit longer than you might expect this kind of book to be, but I enjoyed every single page, and I had a habit of staying up reading it much later than I was meant to. I thoroughly recommend Death in Kashmir by MMK, even if you don't become enraptured by MMK and read everything of hers she ever written, even if you never continue on to any of her other whodunits or to her historical fiction. I think most people that like mysteries, and everyone that likes ones that are set in remote, magical locations, can find something to enjoy in this book. So thank you very much for watching. I suggest you go away and read a good book, and if it happens to be an MMK, I think you're pretty much guaranteed that it will be a good book. Bye.